Mariam Ahmed was a quiet and determined young woman in her mid-20s, hailing from a small village. Her family faced financial struggles after her father's unexpected illness, and Mariam, being the eldest, stepped up to support her younger siblings. Moving to the bustling city of Karachi was not easy for Mariam, but necessity had made her bold. She found a job as an office assistant at Al-Noor Enterprises, a well-known corporation. Though the job came with modest pay, it was a glimmer of hope. Mariam believed hard work could pave her way to a brighter future. Her boss, Zayan Malik, was known to be a stern and no-nonsense individual. At 35, he was the youngest CEO in the industry, famous for his sharp intellect and cold demeanor. Zayan's wealth, success, and influence made him the subject of envy and admiration, but he never let anyone pierce the armor of his professionalism. Mariam was careful to avoid unnecessary interactions with Zayan, afraid her simple background and unpolished demeanor might draw his disapproval. She focused on her work, whether it was arranging files, managing schedules, or assisting senior employees. However, she noticed Zayan observing her from a distance, his sharp eyes often lingering a moment longer than usual. One fateful evening, Mariam was the last person left in the office. It had been a long day, and an important file for the next day's meeting had been misplaced by a senior colleague. Frustrated but determined, Mariam dug through countless cabinets in search of the missing document. Just as she found it, Zayan entered the room. "You're still here, Mariam?" His deep voice startled her. Turning to face him, she clasped the file tightly. "Yes, sir. I couldn't leave without resolving this." For the first time, Zayan's expression softened. "That wasn't even your responsibility. Why did you bother?" "Because it matters," she replied hesitantly, her voice barely audible. "And I couldn't let the company down." For a moment, Zayan said nothing. His gaze shifted to the folder she held, then back to her face. "You're remarkable, Mariam," he finally said, before walking away. As the door closed behind him, Mariam's heart raced. What had just happened? Was it a compliment? A subtle warning? She wasn't sure, but one thing became clear: her boss wasn't as detached as he seemed. The atmosphere in the office grew tenser as weeks passed. Mariam remained deeply engrossed in her duties, her focus unshaken by the chaos around her. Her colleagues often passed curt remarks or made sarcastic comments about her dedication, but Mariam ignored them. She couldn't afford to let anyone's opinion deter her. It was after that evening when Zayan had complimented her that things subtly began to change. He called her to his office more often, asking her opinions about reports or delegating tasks that usually fell outside her job description. Though Mariam couldn't fathom why, she executed every assignment with the same precision and care. One day, Zayan walked into the office with a hard expression, holding a disorganized binder. His voice was sharp as he spoke to the team during the morning meeting. "This presentation needs to be flawless," he said, scanning the group. His eyes landed on Mariam. "Mariam, can you stay back and work on this today? I trust you'll do it right." There was a stunned silence. Mariam nodded, her heart pounding. Why her? She wasn't even in the strategy department. By the end of the day, Mariam's desk was stacked with drafts of presentations and reports. She worked diligently, reformatting slides and clarifying details. When Zayan returned to check on her progress, he looked at her work and said, "Impressive." "Thank you, sir," Mariam replied, trying to remain composed. Zayan lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not when I know someone is counting on me," she said softly. The faintest hint of a smile appeared on his face before he walked away. The promotion announcement was made 2 weeks later. To Mariam's utter disbelief, Zayan had recommended her for a higher position, junior administrator. The raise in salary was significant, enough for her to support her family better. While most of her colleagues congratulated her, whispers followed her wherever she went. "She's probably his favorite," one woman said. "I mean, look at her, pretending to be all hardworking. She must have charmed him somehow." At first, Mariam ignored the comments, but over time, the weight of their words began to crush her confidence. Rumors spread like wildfire, twisting harmless professional interactions into stories of favoritism and manipulation. Mariam avoided Zayan, focusing solely on her tasks. If he noticed her withdrawal, he didn't show it until one day when he found her working late, yet again. "You've been distant lately," he said, standing at her desk with his arms folded. "Is something wrong?" For a moment, Mariam hesitated. Then, gathering her courage, she replied, "It's nothing, sir. Just work pressure." Zayan frowned, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "Mariam, I know when something is bothering my team. Tell me the truth." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her. Mariam looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. People are saying things, sir. About how I got promoted." A long silence followed her words. When Mariam dared to look up, Zayan's expression had turned dark. "Let me make one thing clear," he said firmly. "I don't promote based on opinions or assumptions. You earned this. If anyone has an issue with that, they're welcome to take it up with me." Though his words were reassuring, Mariam couldn't stop the swirl of doubt inside her. A week later, Zayan addressed the entire team. His tone was sharp but measured. "I've noticed an increase in office gossip," he said, his gaze piercing each employee. "Let me remind you that professionalism is paramount. If anyone cannot abide by these principles, they are free to leave. Do I make myself clear?" The office was eerily silent. Zayan's message was unmistakable. Mariam felt a mixture of relief and unease. Though Zayan's speech had silenced the rumors, it also placed her in a spotlight she desperately wanted to avoid. Why was he standing up for her? Later that evening, Zayan approached her in the break room, his demeanor gentler. "You don't need to prove yourself to anyone, Mariam. Just keep doing your work. I'll handle the rest." Mariam nodded, unable to find the right words. In that moment, she realized Zayan wasn't just her boss, he was someone who saw potential in her, someone willing to stand by her when the world seemed against her. Her heart stirred with a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. Days turned into weeks, and Mariam found herself feeling more comfortable in her new role, though the faint whispers of her colleagues never completely vanished. She followed Zayan's advice and focused solely on her work, determined to prove her worth without relying on anyone. Yet, despite her resolve, her growing interactions with Zayan had begun to tug at her emotions in ways she couldn't understand or fully suppress. Zayan, on the other hand, found himself observing Mariam more frequently than he would admit, even to himself. There was something about her quiet strength, her unwavering commitment despite the challenges she faced, that struck a chord deep within him. One stormy evening, the city was hit by unexpected rainfall, and most employees left early to avoid the worsening weather. Mariam had stayed behind, carefully preparing the next day's meeting files. By the time she realized the storm had intensified, the office was almost empty. She was gathering her things to leave when Zayan's voice startled her. "You're still here?" Mariam turned to find him standing by her desk, his usually impeccable suit slightly damp from the rain. "I didn't realize it was so late," she replied hesitantly. "I'll leave in a minute." "You can't leave in this weather," he said firmly. "It's unsafe." Mariam looked out the window, where the rain pelted the glass furiously, and reluctantly agreed. Zayan motioned for her to follow him to his office. "I'll call for someone to take you home once the rain lets up," he said, taking a seat on the couch. "In the meantime, have a seat." Feeling uneasy, Mariam perched on the edge of a nearby chair. The room was silent except for the rhythmic drumming of rain. After a few minutes, Zayan broke the quiet. "Do you always overwork yourself like this?" Mariam blinked, caught off guard by the sudden question. "I'm used to it, sir. I have to, my family depends on me." Zayan leaned back, his expression softening. "Tell me about them." Though hesitant at first, Mariam spoke about her father's illness, her younger siblings' school fees, and the burden she bore as the primary breadwinner. To her surprise, Zayan listened intently, his usual guarded demeanor replaced by genuine interest. "I know how that feels," he said quietly, once she finished. Mariam looked at him in surprise. "My parents died when I was 20. I had to drop out of university and work to support my younger sister. It was years before I could return to my studies and build the career I have now." Mariam's heart clenched at his words. The confident, almost intimidating man she thought she knew suddenly felt more human. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That must have been hard." "It was," Zayan admitted. "But it taught me the value of perseverance." Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, his memories of struggling through odd jobs, her childhood in the village. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, the rain had eased. Zayan stood and glanced out the window. "It's safe to leave now. I'll have my driver drop you home." "Thank you, sir," Mariam said, standing to gather her things. "Mariam," he called as she turned to leave. She looked back, meeting his gaze. "You're stronger than you realize," he said softly. The words lingered in her mind long after she reached home. The days that followed brought a subtle yet undeniable shift in their dynamic. Zayan's reserved personality seemed to melt slightly in Mariam's presence. He often stopped by her desk to ask about her workload, occasionally sharing bits of advice from his own experiences. For Mariam, the boundaries between admiration and something deeper began to blur. She found herself looking forward to his brief interactions and the rare, fleeting moments when his guarded expression gave way to warmth. But the growing closeness also brought confusion and fear. Mariam knew her place in the world. She was a simple girl with responsibilities far greater than her own happiness. Allowing herself to feel anything for someone like Zayan seemed like a dangerous road she couldn't afford to take. She tried to distance herself, keeping their interactions strictly professional. Zayan noticed but said nothing, though his eyes often carried a hint of disappointment. The breaking point came one evening when Zayan overheard a senior manager berating Mariam for a minor error. Though she apologized repeatedly, the man's tone remained harsh and dismissive. Zayan intervened, his voice cold and commanding. "That's enough," he said, fixing the manager with a steely glare. "Everyone makes mistakes. If you can't address them with respect, you have no place in this company." The manager stammered an apology and quickly left. Zayan turned to Mariam. "Are you okay?" "Yes, sir," she said, though her voice wavered. His gaze softened. "Mariam, never let anyone make you feel small. You're more capable than half the people here." His words ignited a mix of gratitude and confusion within her. Why did he care so much? What did he see in her that made him act this way? Her heart, despite all her attempts to resist, was beginning to betray her. Mariam found it increasingly difficult to concentrate at work. Zayan's kindness, his protective nature, and the quiet way he seemed to believe in her were creating feelings she couldn't suppress. Yet, she was painfully aware of the differences between their worlds. Zayan belonged to a world of power and privilege, while she struggled to make ends meet. How could someone like him see her as anything more than just an employee? But the harder she tried to distance herself, the more fate seemed determined to draw them together. One afternoon, Zayan walked into the office accompanied by a striking woman in her early 30s. Dressed in a designer outfit with perfectly styled hair, she radiated confidence. The office buzzed with whispers. This was Arshia, Zayan's former fiancée. Arshia greeted the team politely but lingered in Zayan's office far longer than expected. Mariam's stomach churned with unease, though she tried to ignore it. When Arshia finally left, she glanced in Mariam's direction with a hint of curiosity, as if noticing her for the first time. Later that day, Zayan seemed preoccupied. During a quick team meeting, his usual focus was absent, and though he didn't say anything, Mariam could tell something was on his mind. The next morning, Arshia returned, this time openly engaging with the team. Her laughter echoed in the office as she chatted with Zayan, who seemed polite but distant. Mariam avoided looking their way, her chest tightening with emotions she couldn't name. That evening, as Mariam gathered her things to leave, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Zayan. "Walk with me to the car," he said, his tone gentle. Unsure, Mariam followed him to the elevator. The silence between them was heavy as they stepped outside. The warm evening breeze provided little comfort. "I assume you've noticed Arshia," Zayan said finally. Mariam hesitated. "She's hard to miss, sir." Zayan smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "She's trying to reconnect." Mariam kept her gaze fixed ahead, unsure why he was telling her this. "I ended things with her years ago," Zayan continued, his voice calm but firm. We were never a good match. She valued appearances more than substance, and I couldn't live that way. Mariam nodded, her throat tight. She didn't know how to respond. Mariam, he said, stopping to face her. His eyes searched hers, as if seeking something. You're different. You remind me of who I used to be, someone who fought for everything, no matter the odds. Her heart skipped a beat. Sir, I'm just. No, he interrupted softly. You're not just anything. You're extraordinary, and you don't even see it. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. But before Mariam could process his words, a car pulled up. Zayan's driver stepped out and held the door open for him. Good night, Mariam, Zayan said, his tone formal once again. Mariam murmured a reply and walked away, her heart a storm of emotions. Over the next few days, Zayan's interactions with Mariam became more personal, though still within the boundaries of professionalism. He sought her opinion more often and made a point to thank her for her efforts. His compliments, though subtle, were unmistakable, leaving Mariam increasingly conflicted. Arshia, however, had not given up. She began visiting the office frequently, flaunting her familiarity with Zayan. Her presence unsettled Mariam, though she refused to show it. One afternoon, Arshia cornered her in the break room. You're Mariam, right? Arshia asked, her tone pleasant but probing. Yes, Mariam replied cautiously. You seem to have caught Zayan's attention, Arshia said with a sly smile. That's interesting. Mariam bristled at her tone but kept her composure. He values hard work, nothing more. Arshia tilted her head, studying her. We'll see, she said cryptically before walking away. The encounter left Mariam shaken. That evening, she sat alone in her small apartment, her thoughts racing. She knew she couldn't let her growing feelings for Zayan cloud her judgment. If she allowed herself to care for him, it would only lead to heartbreak. A few days later, Mariam approached Zayan in his office. Sir, may I speak with you? Zayan looked up from his desk, surprised. Of course. Come in. Mariam hesitated, then stepped inside. I've been thinking about resigning. Zayan's expression darkened. Why? It's just. I don't belong here, she said, her voice trembling. People are talking, and I don't want to cause problems for you. Zayan rose from his chair, closing the distance between them. Mariam, you belong here as much as anyone else. Do you think I care about gossip? It's not just that, she said, her eyes filling with tears. We come from such different worlds. I don't want to complicate things for you. Zayan's gaze softened. Mariam, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the heart doesn't care about worlds. It cares about people. And I care about you. His words left her breathless. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't think. Take the weekend to think about it, Zayan said gently. But don't make a decision based on fear. Mariam left his office, her mind and heart in turmoil. The weekend passed in a blur for Mariam. Her emotions were tangled, confusion, fear, and an undeniable feeling of warmth that Zayan's words had planted in her heart. She had spent hours replaying their conversation in her mind, questioning every word and gesture. Was it possible for someone like Zayan Malik, a man of power and privilege, to truly care for her, a simple girl burdened by responsibilities? And even if he did, what would society say? Could she handle the scrutiny that such a relationship would invite? By Monday morning, Mariam still hadn't found the answers. She resolved to focus solely on her work and maintain her distance from Zayan, as difficult as it might be. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be enough to silence the feelings she could no longer ignore. Zayan, on the other hand, was struggling with his own emotions. Though he had spent years mastering the art of restraint, Mariam had managed to break through the walls he had carefully built. Her resilience, humility, and quiet strength reminded him of a simpler time in his life, a time when he had dreams, not expectations, and when love wasn't a calculated risk. When Mariam arrived at work that morning, Zayan's eyes sought hers. He noticed the hesitation in her step, the way her gaze avoided his, and he decided that it was time for clarity. That afternoon, Zayan called her into his office. Mariam entered hesitantly, clutching a folder. You wanted to see me, sir, she asked, keeping her voice neutral. Yes, Zayan said, gesturing for her to sit. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk. Mariam, have you made your decision about staying? Mariam hesitated. I've decided to stay. But I want to keep things strictly professional. Zayan regarded her silently, his expression unreadable. Then, he stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Mariam, he said after a moment, I understand why you feel the way you do. I've spent my entire life navigating the expectations of society, learning when to speak and when to stay silent. But I've realized something recently. The world doesn't matter as much as we think it does. She stared at him, unsure of what to say. He turned to face her, his eyes earnest. You've shown me what it means to care about something beyond ambition and appearances. I can't ignore that, and I don't want to. Sir, this is Zayan, he interrupted gently. Call me Zayan. Mariam lowered her gaze. Zayan, this doesn't make sense. We're too different. You're right, he said, stepping closer. We are different. But differences don't make love impossible, they make it real. I don't care about what people say, Mariam. All I care about is whether you feel the same. Mariam's heart raced. She wanted to believe him, but years of insecurity held her back. What if it doesn't work? What if I can't fit into your world? Zayan smiled softly. Then we'll build a new one together. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments of joy and cautious steps forward. Mariam and Zayan agreed to keep their relationship private for the time being, allowing themselves the chance to navigate their feelings without interference. But the world, as always, had its way of intruding. One afternoon, Arshia stormed into Zayan's office, her expression livid. Is it true? She demanded. Is what true? Zayan asked calmly. Arshia spat, gesturing towards Mariam's desk. Are you seriously involved with her? Zayan stood, his expression cool but firm. Arshia, my personal life is none of your concern. She doesn't belong in your world, Arshia said, her voice rising. She's beneath you, Zayan. Enough, Zayan said sharply. Mariam has more integrity in her little finger than most people I've met. If you can't respect her, you're not welcome here. Arshia stormed out, leaving the office buzzing with speculation. That evening, Zayan called Mariam into his office. She entered cautiously, aware of the stares she'd received all day. I'm sorry about what happened earlier, he said. It's not your fault, Mariam replied. But I'm not sure I can handle this, Zayan. Everyone's talking, judging. Zayan stepped closer, taking her hand. Mariam, let them talk. The only thing that matters is how we feel about each other. For the first time, Mariam allowed herself to believe him completely. I don't want to let you down, she whispered. You never could, Zayan replied. Months later, the office gathered for an annual event. Zayan, as always, gave a speech this time, acknowledging the people who had inspired and supported him. As he ended his speech, he glanced at Mariam, who stood among the crowd, her eyes wide with emotion. And to Mariam, he said, surprising everyone, who taught me that courage, kindness, and love can change the course of a person's life. Mariam blushed, tears threatening to spill. The applause was deafening, and in that moment, Mariam knew she had made the right choice. She and Zayan had faced challenges together, but their love, built on respect and trust, was strong enough to withstand them all. Together, they had found not just success, but the kind of happiness that few dared to dream of.